Good afternoon. On behalf of the entire First Bank team, welcome to our May 2023 webinar entitled Keeping the Family Legacy Alive. Our webinars are presented by the First Bank Center for Family-Owned Businesses. We bring you these monthly webinars to provide you, the family business owner and leader, tools, resources, and ideas on how to better run your business and be more successful as a leader. Before we begin today's conversation, we invite you to watch this quick video by our chairman and president, Michael Dierberg, and we'll be right back.
Family business is so much more than just business as usual. It takes an entirely different mindset, a different vision. You know a bright future is found in strong traditions. You see the freedom in looking further down the road. As part of the fourth generation of my family to help lead First Bank, I know we share your vision. That's why we've created the First Bank Center for Family-Owned Businesses to share our experience with monthly webinars, tailored products, tools, and education specific to family-owned businesses. Your vision is our vision. Let our experience be yours. Let's see what your future can be.
We appreciate you being with us today. And today I will be sitting down with our chairman, Michael Dierberg, who you just saw in the video. He's the chairman of the board of FB Corporation First Bank and fourth generation owner of First Bank, and also Pierre DuPont of the DuPont family. This intriguing conversation today between these two values-driven family business leaders will focus on running a multi-generational family business. We're going to talk about their philanthropic efforts. We're going to talk a lot about leadership. And we're also going to talk quite a bit today, as the title of the seminar says, on honoring and protecting family and the family business legacy. The Dierberg and the DuPont families are rich in legacy, rich in history, and we're excited for you to learn more about each of their backgrounds, what they've done in the past, and what they're currently doing. By the way, if you have any questions for the panelists throughout the webinar today, there is a Q&A feature, as you all probably know by now, with all the Zoom calls we've all done over the last few years. Feel free to enter any questions on the Q&A, and we will get to as many of those as we can throughout the course of the day. First of all, let me give you a little bit about each of our guests today. Continuing its fourth generation of family ownership, Michael Dierberg serves as the chairman of FB Corporation and president of First Bank. His passion is helping family and privately held businesses thrive, grow, and succeed for many generations. Prior to rejoining First Bank in 2010, Michael was an attorney at the United States Department of Justice, and before that, served as general counsel of First Bank. He's also a second-generation owner, along with his sister Ellen, of Star Lane and Dierberg Vineyards, located in Santa Barbara, California. Pierre DuPont is an independent advisor to individuals, entrepreneurs, businesses, and business owners. He has a long history of starting companies and working with private business owners, founders, tech startups, and growth companies. He works with all types of wealthy individuals and families and multi-gen inheritors. He's a mentor to early stage companies of many types and an occasional angel investor as well. Pierre is skilled in entrepreneurship, strategic planning, venture capital, family offices, capital markets, mergers and acquisitions, finance and investing, etc. He's also a very seasoned professional with an unparalleled global network and a passion for service as a fiduciary for his clients. So first of all, Michael and Pierre, welcome. It's great to see the two of you today. Thank you for taking the time to join us. I'd love to just start off by let's set the stage and talk a little bit about family and your roles, just kind of big picture it for us for now. Michael, tell us a little bit about your role within First Bank, the wineries, and just a little bit about your background. And then Pierre, same question to you.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I rejoined the company in 2010. I'm now the chairman of the parent company of First Bank. So we have a non-family CEO, wonderful non-family CEO. Her name is Shelley Seifert. And so I support her. There's a few areas within the bank that I devote a lot of time to, but otherwise, serve as chairman of First Bank. And in many ways act as kind of a liaison to the family. We also have my sister. She's on the board of directors. My dad, who was at one time the CEO, I guess early 2000s, he was still the CEO. Then he stepped down, became chairman, and I became chairman after him. He is also still on the board. So I'm not the only family member in the company, but I'm the one who's most active in it day to day.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. Pierre, I know your role is a little bit different. Obviously, we know the DuPont name. Many of us, associate it with chemical and the rich history there. Can you talk maybe about just your role, your parents, siblings, any family members still involved in the business, and how you tie in with that as far as the family, the office, and so forth?
Well, I think I have to give and I'm very happy to be here, Ed and Michael. Thank you both for having me come along to chat. I love this topic. And in fact, Michael, I particularly liked what Ed just said about you with, I think it was a passion for helping family businesses thrive for many generations. That I'm the end game of what you are attempting to do. I am the 8th generation in the DuPont family. The DuPont company was a private partnership throughout the 1800s for literally 100 years. And it was kind of opaque. There were 4 or 5 partners, but after 100 years, the family is a couple hundred people big. And that was really the phase when I think it's in the position that many families or people on this call might be, where we're G2 or G3 or G4 maybe. In the early 1900s, the DuPont company was purchased and converted to a C corporation by 3 cousins, with the support of the entire family, because of course they got stock back rather than actual cash. And those 3 cousins built the DuPont company today. They struggled. You can see it in their writings in the 1910s, 1920s to find sufficient leadership of the caliber they wanted within the family. And again, the family was a couple hundred people big at that point. And basically professional managers came in, and one of the reasons they converted into a C Corp was to be able to give equity to professional managers from the outside. The DuPont families had very little to do with the DuPont company in the last 50 to 60 years. My brother, however, full disclosure, he's on the board, not because he has any great amount of stock, which we don't, but because he's a smart guy in Wilmington, where DuPont is headquartered. So that's the DuPont company. Of more interest, I think, to this call is actually my mother's family business. I am very fortunate to be born into 2 unrelated families that came together in my parents. My mother's family owns and we tightly control a very large business today called Wawa. WAWA. It's a convenience store, quick serve restaurant, gas station on the East Coast from New Jersey to Florida. And there are about 1,000 locations, about 50,000 employees. And it's been growing like gangbusters for 50 years. My Uncle Dick, my mother's brother, was the CEO of that since the mid-70s. He retired a few years back. There's now entirely professional management in the company. And again, 50,000 employees. So that's quite a large company. Brilliant professional management. And it is still a private company. My brother chose to make Wawa his career. And when he came out of business school, I don't know, 30 years ago, a long time ago, he went to Wawa and started sweeping floors and worked up. Very important message there. If you're going to, want to get into senior management, in a family business, you really do need to know the business top to bottom. And one way to do that is to be in the business, of course. He rose up to be CFO. And then about 10 years ago, I think he decided that I don't know. I can't put thoughts in his head, but he retired effectively. And when Uncle Dick retired a year later, he appointed an outside someone who'd been in the company for many years to be the CEO, who's spectacular. Chris, unbelievable. Very happy there. I myself was on the family council for a couple of years, for actually a bunch of years back in the OOs. And there's a family council that appoints several board members that the family directly, that are family members. There are also a bunch of independent board members, and that's very important, independent board members, I would argue for. And then there are some executives within the company, professional executives who are on the board. I am G5 in my mother's family. And once again, there are now, I believe, including infants, 200 descendants of the man that founded what is now known as Wawa. And we are the owners effectively of the business. So that's the background.
Awesome. Thank you, Pierre. I appreciate that. And yeah, quite a bit as you're answering the question, I just keep hearing legacy, 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 which is again, the theme of our
Absolutely.
webinar today. So Michael, I'll start with you. In St. Louis, obviously the Dierberg name with the grocery store, with the bank, out here in California with the winery. When you think of legacy and that legacy for the Dierberg family, what's been passed to you that really resonates and sticks with you? And taking that a second step, moving that forward for your future generations, your children, and going forward. I know at First Bank, we think in terms, and at the winery you've mentioned, thinking in terms of generations and centuries into the future. When you think of the Dierberg name and legacy, and then obviously Pierre, the DuPont name, probably a bigger scale because it's a worldwide known brand. But walking around the streets with the DuPont last name, I'd like to hear each of your perspectives on that. Michael?
Well, first, just to be clear, so our family has no ownership in the grocery store that's in St. Louis.
True.
And it is, you know, frankly, I mean, it ties, I guess, to the topic of legacy, that when people, you know, I'd mentioned my name, they say, oh, you're part of the grocery store family. And the nice thing is that it's a real positive confusion on their part, because invariably I get these really positive comments about the store. So when I tell them, no, that's not us, they might say, oh, or, you know, you don't get free groceries or something like that. But our family is connected, as it was part of the same family going back 100 years ago. And we're still really close to the family that owns the store. But, you know, I'd say for us, I mean, you know, although I am fourth generation, I'm effectively second generation, because my dad ended up buying out relatives on the banking side. So the bank is really owned by, you know, myself and my siblings at this point. So the legacy is something that, you know, my dad has passed on to us about, you know, how he got the bank, how he acquired it, all the hard work that went into building the bank up until that point, and then the hard work that went into building the bank during his tenure. Not only him as a leader, but also a variety of leaders and just the employee base of the company. And that's what I think of as legacy. It's all the hard work that went into getting you to a certain place, and I'm the beneficiary of that legacy.
Thank you, Michael.
I would take it, I would take it a little, exactly the same statement. And I would say that it is even the stories, maybe to put a finer point on it. And obviously the stories of the hard work and the successes, and indeed the failures. Because all of these things make up the legacy, the heritage. And I often say to people that there doesn't need to be any money. A legacy, a heritage, some great stories of success and struggle and even failure can be used to bind your family together. Legacy generally, to bind your family, to keep your family cohesive over 50 to 100 years. And I think the value in that is, and then I see this, I saw this as a kid, that I have cousins and I can't go to them and, you know, beg for a mortgage or, you know, a free handout. I would never do that, of course, but they're there. We share a heritage. They understand where I'm coming from, where I came from, where they came from. And together that gives us something extra in the way of a relationship that I think is actually very powerful. And I want to make sure that I carry that on to my descendants and indeed my siblings' descendants and broader than that, even though it's a lot of people. But yeah, the traditions of building the business, of working in the business, of the successes and failures, the heritage, the name, if you will, the brand that you have created. And that's a double-edged sword. Michael, you give a good example of your name being a good starting point for people. And indeed, I suppose the DuPont name is, but it comes with other problems too. You know, oh, you must be infinitely wealthy. Why, you know, why are you wasting your time with me? I know one's ever said those words, but I imagine that's what's in their heads, which is the stupidest thing to want to hear. You don't want to hear that, right? So yeah, the brand is important. The legacy you leave behind in the business you have created and the impact it's had on the communities in which it exists is critical.
So in the family business space, obviously legacy is a huge word and a huge conversation that we have. We always talk about going back generations and going forward generations. Let's talk a little bit about the how. What advice would either of you, and I'll just toss this to both of you, what advice would you give on kind of the how we can protect? Let's say we're thinking back 3 or 4 generations or 5 or 8 in your case, Pierre. What are some things that you do to really protect and honor that legacy that you hope others in your generation going forward and generations going forward will do as well? Trick question, sort of, but I mean, just, yeah.
Sure.
basic
No,
pointers for
yeah,
how to protect
it's a
that
good question. And let me just jump in. I mean, I am fortunate in both my mother's family and also in my father's family, in that there are some very substantial philanthropic entities that were created 100 years ago, or in fact, quite a bit more than that in one case. And they are very visible and very big in the mid-Atlantic area, which is where both mother's and father's families are come from. And, you know, our engagement with some of those, I was down, I'm living, and I'm here in New York right now, but yesterday I was in Wilmington, Delaware. I went to Longwood Gardens, one of those great public charities, I suppose. It's a huge set of gardens, horticultural center and so on. And they get something like 6,000 or 7,000 visitors a day. You know, no one knows me, which is fine when I walk in the door, but you know, we all take turns on the board of that. Yeah, I have not been on the board. I don't live in Wilmington. My brothers are and have been, and as have many others of my cousins. And that's a tool for carrying on legacy, being on that kind of thing. For me, generally, though, the key is to talk about the history. Talk with your family, with your children, with your grown children, your younger children, about where it came from. That's the key.
Appreciate that. Michael, anything to add on to that?
Yeah, I think a big part of this is, I mean, I think for Pierre and his families, I think they've done a lot of work to preserve the history. But for a lot of other families, that work hasn't yet been done.
Right.
And I will say for us, we have started on that process of trying to preserve that history of the family, because I think it does provide this really nice connection. And actually, it started with my grandma. She basically did some genealogy, did a lot of research, and then kind of wrote a book about the families. And we've done that more recently, recording video of my parents, my dad talking about the bank, sort of growing up in the family business, that kind of thing. So it's really nice to have that. We haven't yet gotten to the point of doing anything with it, but I think thankfully the technology is getting to the point where if you record it, and then AI will figure out what to do with it, or you'll prompt a question and it's going to produce it for you. So I think that's been really nice. And everything too for us is sort of a direct interaction from generation to generation. So I've had the benefit of interacting with my parents, grandparents, but then like for my dad, for him to talk to his grandchildren about his experiences, and the kids can directly interact with him and find out stories when he was their age, that kind of thing, or growing up in the business. I think there's a lot of value in that. And you never know what questions they're going to ask. It might be different than the questions I would ask.
Yeah, that's great. Being that bridge between the generation before you and the generation after, I think that's fantastic.
That's a good way to look at it. And I would emphasize what you said, Michael, about creating those stories. Recording videos is a great example, particularly of the older generation as they begin to get old and maybe begin to forget to document some of these stories by video. Very easy to do today. There are a lot of tools. One of them is so simple. It's just the genealogy itself, that family tree. So Michael, you have a couple of cousins and a couple of siblings, and they each have a couple of kids, presumably. You know, that chart is a good start. And that is a wonderful tool because it can be given to a teenager to maintain and to grow. And it doesn't change very often. You're producing a new child, once every 5 years. Not that frequent, but it's again, a great tool, and it's much harder to create 50 years from now than today. But family meetings as a way of talking, coming together to talk about the shared asset, and indeed recorded stories, whether they're handwritten, artifacts. My family has got both sides, lots of little artifacts of the businesses long ago. Another thing to try to gather and preserve.
Yeah, I love that. I'm actually not currently part of a family business, but I have the genealogy of the Hart family and my mom's family that goes back literally centuries. And the sense of pride that I feel in my family legacy, just seeing those names that go back, makes me want to protect that legacy a little bit more. So I would imagine.
And if you can attach some stories to some of those names,
Exactly.
What they did, now it's probably hard 200 years ago, but 50 years ago, Michael, your grandparents, whatever, what they were doing at the time, where they started their jobs, what schools they went to, the first couple of career steps, very valuable.
If I could add something to this, though, that I think that, it's really critical that when you build on the legacy too, and not use the legacy as sort of something that's boxing you in into what you are as a company or a family, it has to evolve and be ready to change, because as you can, we all know, I just talked about AI. Things are changing so rapidly. And if you don't build on it, be willing to evolve to meet whatever the changing circumstances are, you may not have a family business for very long. So I think it's important both to respect the history, but also be willing to evolve it and change it over time, because you're building the future legacy.
I tend to think about three things which will come right back to what you just said, Michael. Three things that I think are most important to succeed in projecting a legacy, a heritage, a shared asset, a business or financial assets down the generational trade. Three things. You got to have long-term thinking. So when you're talking with the family, when you're talking about the business and the oversight of the assets, whatever it is, that you are truly thinking of 20 and 50 and even 100-year timeframes. Kind of hard to do, but very important to do. Secondly, engagement, which comes a bit to what you were just talking about, Michael, with how things are going to evolve. How things are going to evolve. You need to engage the family and help them feel they have a voice. That then allows my third point, which is the flexibility to, exactly as you said, Michael, to evolve the business, to evolve the view of the heritage of the legacy. The view itself needs to evolve. So balanced long-term thinking, engagement across the family, and flexibility to evolve the legacy, the business, the shared assets, and everything.
Yeah, I love those points. Each of you, as you were talking, reminded me of the conversation that I've had individually with each of you over the past, and then collectively when we did a preparatory call for this a couple of weeks ago. Talk about the difference between the word stewardship and the word ownership. I love how each of you approached that. Michael, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, I think it is interesting. Like a lot of times companies and owners of companies might talk about having the employee base think like an owner. But I think some of the owners, I think in us in particular, we try to think as stewards, which is a little slightly different than thinking as an owner. And thinking as a steward, you're starting off from a standpoint of appreciating how it came to you. That it wasn't necessarily something that you just, create out of thin air, made with your own hands. There was a lot of other people along the way to help get it to you. So that's one aspect I think that is different of stewardship versus just ownership. And the other thing is, and then how you got it and your sort of role with that thing that's in your trust and your care. There's responsibility to it, and in a way that's different than if you're just viewed as an owner. An owner, if you own a sandwich, you just bought a sandwich, you could do whatever you want with it. You just toss it, do it. You don't own any responsibility to the sandwich, but you do as a steward of something like a family business. So
I would add to that with maybe a bit of guidance for those who are thinking about talking to their children, their young children in particular, about a legacy, about maybe inherited assets or a shared family asset of some sort. My dad was very good about this. He died a few years back, but I can remember very clearly back in the late 60s. I want to say 68, summer of 68. Not quite sure that's the right year, but definitely summertime. I remember my two younger brothers sitting there and my older sister sitting there. And Dad talked about his heritage, the DuPont family heritage, a lot, and how fortunate he was to have been able to receive some of that, that heritage, that legacy, and indeed some assets. But he said something that was just brilliant for us and stuck with me to this day. We've talked about it a lot since, before he died. Over decades, we spoke about these words. But he said, the trusts coming your way from my father and our ancestors before that. This is my father speaking now. From his father and our ancestors before that are not just for you and me. We have a responsibility to manage, to limit consumption, maybe improve upon those assets so that they can provide similar benefit to our descendants and the communities in which they live in the distant future. And I will never forget, the trusts coming your way from my father and our ancestors before that are not just for you. You have a responsibility. Wow. Very important. And you can say that to a 10-year-old kid.
Yeah, there's power in legacy, that's for sure. Do either of you have a turning point that you can go back to in your memory of when your family business, and again, I know, Pierre, it's a slightly separate conversation for you. So Michael, I'm going to really gear this at you. that maybe goes back to your dad or earlier, where there was a turning point that if that didn't happen or that happened differently, the business might look completely different than it does today?
No, I think for my dad, I mean, he was always trying out different things. He's sort of a serial entrepreneur. He's still starting new businesses, not within the bank, but outside of the bank. So like at one time we had a travel agency that was actually, I think that was part of the bank, or at least connected to it. So I don't know that there's like a one time. I think we've been evolving over time. Obviously, we've been a bank all this time, but how we operate as a bank has evolved with technology, circumstances, et cetera. So for us, I think it's just something that's constantly in motion.
Yeah. I can point to a couple of specific points in my mother's family and my father's family, and I'll do it very briefly. My father's family, after 100 years, the family was struggling to figure out who would be the partners taking over the business at the end of the the end of the 1800s, so 1899. There were lots of letters and correspondence about, who's going to be running this business. The partnership was a series of old men at that point, and they didn't see anyone else. I think partly because they didn't really want to let anyone in. This is a common problem of strong-willed patriarchs and matriarchs, is bringing folks in. But anyway, they had decided to sell, the family decided to sell the business, but three cousins stood up and said, you know what, guys, this asset is too valuable. The history here is too great. We can do so much with this, and we don't want to let go of it. So let us buy it from you in exchange, of course, for equity in the new business. And that was 1902 when that happened, exactly 100 years, in fact, after the original partnership was formed in 1802. Those three cousins, Pierre, Alfred Irene, Lamont, actually there was a fourth, TC, Thomas Coleman, DuPont. They took over that business, and they were fantastic businessmen. They didn't know that at the time, but they knew they could do more with this business, and they proved themselves. In fact, their Sloan School of Business in Boston at MIT is full of stories of the DuPont company in the early 1900s because of these people. So that was a critical moment. The DuPont company today wouldn't be here if that hadn't happened, of course. But maybe a more relevant critical moment, and one which I, to this day, am not going to be able to dissect exactly how it happened. That was when my mother's brother, Uncle Dick, was selected 3 years out of law school. He'd been a practicing lawyer for 3 years in the early 70s. He was selected by my grandfather and two cousins of his, who were the sort of partnership, if you will, that ran the Wawa, which was very small at that point. And they picked Uncle Dick for reasons that we'll never know. And my gosh, he was exactly the right guy. He has achieved phenomenal growth over the 50 years. And, lots of things he did and he had lots of setbacks and challenges along the way, but he was the right person. And that, to me, really illuminates the challenge of finding the next gen. Yeah. Or the next gen team that will take on leadership in the business. It's not easy to do. And I doubt very much that my grandfather and his cousins were really picked Uncle Dick because it was clear Uncle Dick had the right capabilities. They probably saw things in him that were right, but it was a bit of a gamble. But gosh, it worked perfectly well. So that's always a challenge, how you nurture your younger generation and then are able to pick several and do it in a political way that doesn't upset everyone else in the family who wasn't selected, so that the family will stay cohesive. And again, that worked very well, partly because Uncle Dick is a master at managing his family, but also, I suppose, because the generation before him was good and was able to talk to their youngsters and say, hey, Uncle Dick's going to be a great guy here to steward, to lead your shared asset.
Yeah, and it reminds me of the Jim Collins famous book, Good to Great, where he talks about getting the right people on the bus and, getting those people within the family conditioned and prepared for transition into the company. Have there been non-family members? I know you both have rich heritages within your family. We're going to come back to that in a second because the whole topic here is legacy. But talk about any non-family executive, leader, mentor that maybe you've had that has inspired you to grow to the level that you are in your career now. Michael, anybody come to mind for you inside the company, outside the company, just a non-family person that has really molded you?
Yeah, I could start recently with our current CEO, Shelley Seifert, just an amazing person, an amazing leader. She's always asking, how can she help? What can she do? whether it's, someone at the lowest level of the company all the way up through the other executives. She wants to improve the company, improve how we serve our clients, and really very much a servant leader. So she's, I guess, probably, let's see, our third non-family CEO. Each one had, differences in terms of their skill set, talents. And it's been really great for me to be exposed to each one of them because each one brings something different. But we have been very fortunate in having had some great leadership as CEO, but then also throughout the organization.
Yeah, and the impact that she has on others within your family and also the company too, that just expands when we find somebody that's that great leader or mentor that they can just take on that influence on so many people in the organization. Pierre, anybody come to mind for you? I'm sure several.
I had 30 years in a completely different career. I'm a computer guy. I spent, my life in the software industry until about 10 years ago. And there was an executive founder of the tech company I worked for in Boston, a guy named Leo Baranek, who was a bit of a mentor to me when I joined his company. He was already a fairly old man, not involved in the management of the company at the time, but I met with him half a dozen times in literally my first job out of college. So I'm 22 years old or something crazy. But he was very powerful in sort of guiding me on the things that I needed to do to develop my business acumen. I was a tech person, and we did that for the first years, but he kept pointing out, you got to get marketing experience, you got to get sales experience, got to go do some finance work, and you got to be involved in operations and manufacturing at one point, all of these things. And he was just a classic business mentor, but that kind of person you need, especially when you're young.
Yeah. I love that. One of the keys to a successful, not just a transition in a family business, but just a successful career, I believe, and for what this is just my belief, but I think it's shared by most, is establishing some really strong core values, not just for your organization, but for yourself individually. So, Michael, what values would you say are key to your success as the president and chairman of First Bank, your success throughout your career, and other values maybe that you're still trying to learn and maybe grow and establish and develop as you move forward?
Well, if I can, I think I would focus on maybe what are the things that we as a family or the company, the values that are important to us. I mean, I try to live up to it, but I don't want to speak and say that these are, my values and what I demonstrate to the utmost.
What do you drive for? Sure.
I think, the truth is that I don't think families and family businesses are necessarily all that, we're not more special than other people in the companies. I mean, I really learn from others in the company. I'm inspired by others in the company. So I guess what I would say for us, I think the key is, the thing I would name is integrity. I think that runs through the importance of family-owned businesses and sort of the value that they have, and something that I think people appreciate, that family-owned businesses can look at it with a long-term perspective and not take shortcuts, and always trying to do the right thing. So I think if you have that long-term perspective, you do things with integrity, it should work out, and you put the hard work in, it'll work out in the end. And I think that's something that, I learned from my dad, that he never talked about values. Like, here's, this is a really important value. Here's what it means. Here's how you should do it. He just did it. He just lived these values. And so I'd say for me, integrity is number one. I hope I live that every day, but again, I'm not saying I'm any more special than anyone else. I'm just trying to learn, be inspired by others as much as anybody else.
Yeah, showing the pattern is certainly a lot more powerful than talking about the pattern. Appreciate that. Pierre, how about you? You've had a great long career, and obviously it didn't just happen. What has been really your core?
Yeah, maybe I'll answer the question in two ways. One is sort of more personal about some of the values that I've seen, but then I'll try and answer, because it turns out I think there are some common values in the families and the business leadership of both the DuPont company 100 years ago and Wawa, 25, 50 years ago, that have been, I think, core to their long-term success. But for me, integrity is certainly one of them. And I, that comes to me through my father, who spent his career as a public servant, and that was by choice, and I think a fairly impactful one. But he showed that, and he showed it because there were a lot of people in the political sphere who are not so clear about their integrity. And Dad was very clear about it. And he did little things in his political world that you could see that's exactly why he was doing it, because it's the way he was. It was in his very nature. But another thing that he did that I appreciated when I was growing up and even in my later life was his focus on the community. That was why he went into public service, because he wanted to make a difference in the neighborhood in which he lives, in the state in which he lives, and in the country in which he lives and lived. And that was his purpose. That same focus on community and the importance of having a healthy community, because everything you and I, all three of us would do ever, is not something we do by ourselves. It depends upon the person who put this computer in front of me and the desk and the office and the electricity for that matter. I mean, you can go a little too far with it, but that's essential to understand that it takes a village, as everyone says, to make anything happen. And to remember that and to in fact value the people that are sort of walking around taking care of all this stuff for you when you're not using it and making it here. That was a key characteristic of both Wawa in the early days and still today, very much today, and DuPont. For lots of reasons. In DuPont in the early days, it was because we were making explosives, and that's a dangerous business. From day one in 1802, DuPont, Pierre DuPont, Eleuthère DuPont, who founded the gunpowder company that was DuPont, said, look, if you come to work here and something happens to you, we will give a life pension, a house, food, and an education to your children for the rest of their lives. And they did that. And there is evidence of that today, which I saw growing up, of probably hundreds when I was a kid, now only several dozen of these worker houses that remain. And these were not workers, these were pension houses for people whose husbands had died or been badly hurt in an explosion in the, and so that was a culture, to take care of your people and indeed your community, which of course also came through in the philanthropies and the public parks and the education systems, something my dad did. I did not really know about. I only came across it about a year ago. He created a huge nonprofit, which educates kids across America in the high school level. It keeps them from dropping out. Very impactful. Again, taking care of the community. I see that in Wawa too. And Wawa, it comes through, use the word servant leadership, Michael, which Michael Dick used to say all the time. But he takes it even further, and then he's taking servant leadership and he's giving equity. He's giving a sense of ownership and engagement in every decision, right down to the janitors and the stackers of milk crates in the milk plant. And that again was essential for Wawa. The kind of people it brought in and it kept. Everyone feels they have an ownership stake, and indeed there's a lot of equity held by people all the way to the bottom of the company. But there's a sense of ownership in decisions and engagement in decisions, and that is another artifact of both DuPont and Wawa. Certainly in the early 100 years of DuPont, that was the way it worked.
I love that. There's so much tradition there. You've hit on a word that we want to talk about here and maybe shift gears a little bit. You mentioned it earlier in our conversation, and you brought it up a lot now. I love that word community, of the community coming together, unifying. It's kind of how those work. I love words and how they work. When either of you, Mike, I'm going to go to you first. When you think about how you personally, First Bank, the Dierberg family give back to the community, whether you want to talk about your philanthropic efforts specifically or just engaging the community, what comes to mind for you on how that works and how that really helps the business grow as well? Because I'm a firm believer that the more we give, the more we receive. I mean, that goes back to thousands of years back, but I really have seen it in today's age too. I'm sitting in a studio on campus of Antis Roofing, which is a client of First Bank and a dear friend of all of us. And Charles Antis is famous for his giving, and as he's been giving, especially in the pandemic the last 3+ years, their business has just escalated. Anything with you that comes up as far as how, as you've been given or been involved in the community, it's benefited you personally or the business?
Yeah, I guess just one thing I would say is that in terms of how we give, I'd say, I don't know, maybe 7 years ago, something like that. We decided as a company, at First Bank as a company, to have a focus, philanthropic focus. And that I think has really been a good thing for us. And I think hopefully for the philanthropies, the charities that we help. And basically that is around next generation, helping kids from under-resourced communities thrive, get the education they need, especially around education. And that's, so it's something that, it's very much aligned with the family's interests, and it's in line with what the company decided the direction we wanted to go. And the nice thing about this is that it's given us an opportunity to really focus on what's going to move the dial. Because if we, given our resources, and just any company really has limited resources, so to be able to focus on one particular area, that's what we've decided to do. So basically we have, giving directly from the bank. We've hired a great leader named Stacy Clay, who helps out in guiding us in how we should give money, how we should help out in the area of education and other next gen philanthropies. And then the family individually gives as well. And for myself, let's just say I've also focused on this. So joined some boards of educational organizations, and it's just really helped me understand what is going to make a difference. And so I think that's been real positive for the family and for the family business. And I think, obviously it's important to our clients to know that we're out there in the community, we're giving back, and we do.
Thank you.
Philanthropy itself is a perfect tool. You can use it as a tool. So instead of giving $10,000 to the soup kitchen or whatever, get your kids to give $10,000 to the soup kitchen. And give them the money, if you will, but get them to go out and figure out which soup kitchen or which charity, whichever flavor or flavors. And maybe you don't even bound that. You let them pick, again, about engagement and feeling ownership in the decision, and then delivering of the goods. We do that in our family, and certainly have done it historically in both the DuPont and the Wood family. There is a lot of engagement. We, at the top level, 150, 170 years ago now, in the 1850s, my mother's father's family, the Richard Wood family in Philadelphia, provided sort of a founding grant to start a hospital in Philadelphia, which has become very prominent. It's called Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, CHOP, as it's known. And it is a phenomenal hospital today. But every 20 years, the family has come together to gather the resources to build the new headquarters building for the hospital. We've done that, I don't know, 15 times, probably not that many times, probably 8 times. Just did it a couple of years ago. And let me tell you, it gets very hard, because you're now asking people, 150 people to come together with a single contribution. Not only is it going to work, but the fact that we've been doing that, and the fact that we talk about it as a family, continue to talk about it, even interstitially between these big asks. We talk about it all the time. That's how you build the contribution. But one other point I would add, sort of changing the topic a little bit about that community, though, for me is very important, and that is mentoring. As a tech entrepreneur, I've had some success and quite a few failures in my tech entrepreneurship life. But today I probably spend almost an hour a day, and I'm not kidding. I mean, talking 4 or 5 hours a week on the phone, on a Zoom call, maybe in a meeting with a young entrepreneur trying to start a business. And I do that for no ask back. All the schools I've been to, my college, high school I went to, and even a middle school I went to, know that I'm happy to do that. And I get pinged by them each, once or twice a month. Now, here's a guy or a gal that's trying to do something. You want to get on the phone with them, offer them a couple of comments. That, to me, is very fulfilling and very powerful. No money involved, but a lot of time involved. That becomes the challenge there, but I love doing it.
I love that. Michael, I was going to talk about mentorship a little bit. Pierre, you cracked it open for us. So let's just keep that topic open for a minute. We've got some time left here. When you hear the word mentorship, just big picture, open mic night, if you will, what do you think of when you think of mentorship?
I'd say mentorship in the context of a family business and for a family member in the family business is really kind of different. Because you end up to be mentored, to have someone give you guidance and feedback when you're a family member in the family business. That's tough. So you have to kind of look to, parents, perhaps, in my case, my dad, who, worked in the company, but, his circumstances were different, obviously, than mine. Times were different, all that. So for example, First Bank has a, very significant mentorship program. And I'm invited to these events. I always tell them I'm the worst person to be talking about mentorship, because it's just from a family member standpoint, it's tough. But I do think that sort of tying it back to legacy, I do think there's opportunities for parents, maybe aunts, uncles, whoever it is, to help family members, and maybe even, for organizations, maybe perhaps even the Center for Family-Owned Businesses, to help in that, so that from one family to another, you're getting a mentor, because it can be tough within a company, your family-owned business, to get that kind of guidance.
Yeah, I would completely agree that finding people who are not in your family to mentor you. I mean, that to me jumps right to this question of sort of independent directors. And so having someone who in that independent director role, who also maybe comes from a family business of a different flavor, but might have some guidance around family dynamics and so on, is one thing. But in order to be, I think, most successful in having younger generations recognize the importance of having mentors and listening to others, typically elders, but not always, you need to see it. They need to see it happen in you, that you do indeed have some mentors, and they're aware of that, that you are open about how, so-and-so is helpful to me in these ways. So-and-so is guiding me in that way. And maybe it's a family member, maybe it's not. But I think your one's teenage kids, one's 20-something kids, they will be the best able to work with mentors and recognize the value in them and extract value from it and take that value if they have seen that their parents and management in the companies that they are in have mentors, have outsiders helping them. That's very important.
Michael, talk to that young family business leader now. Maybe they're Gen 1, maybe they're just getting started, 30-something years old, started the company. Their kids are really, really young right now, if they have kids at all. What could they do? And Pierre, same question going to you as well. From your perspective, what can they do to really protect and honor not just the legacy, but build the legacy for the future when they really maybe don't even have the children in mind yet? Does that question make sense? Just so, what advice would you give to that young person just getting started when they're thinking about their family legacy?
I think first is thinking about things that they need to do to set up the business for long-term success. I mean, the things like estate planning. I mean, that's, but I think it becomes almost, maybe is it too early at that point to be thinking about the legacy. If this is a first generation person, right, they're building a legacy. And I think we shouldn't lose the fact that when we think about the people who've come before us, we're building a legacy for future generations. And so I think looking at it with that long-term perspective, that would go a long way, for this person. I think doing things to kind of record, preserve some of the history as they're doing it, I think that could be beneficial. But my guess is most people who are the entrepreneurs who are really just getting the business started, they're so focused on making it happen. And that's, I think, my dad's case as well, was that was his focus, and not so much on the legacy. So it kind of comes to later generations to be really thinking about legacy. What does that mean? How do you preserve it? But it's, it's never too early to get started, though, on preserving some of this.
Kind of like, building the plane while we're flying it, right? We're building the legacy while we're going forward, and then look back, oh, look what we've built. Pierre?
Yeah, it's not difficult to record, though, some of the challenges and successes that you had, and maybe some of those little video snippets being recorded, personal diaries. That certainly is what my family historians, and there are such folks in those kind of roles, have from the DuPont family 100, 200 years ago. They have infinite diaries and handwritten letters and so on. And similarly in the Wood family. But I think I agree with you completely, Michael, about the first generation. Does the first generation even have the intent of building an entity that is going to carry on within the family? I think that's very rare that people do have that intent. So I think it's more likely this second generation that is going to be the one that's received this from their parents and said, well, wait a second, actually, I'm going to have to do that again. And maybe I should carry it on to the third generation. But either the first or the second, the little magic phrase that I like to think I've even trademarked in some sense that I use all the time. So I love this expression. You want to establish, and these words are each important, traditions of safe, open, and regular communications within the family. Maybe it's only a spouse, but talk to that spouse about the business, about the decisions you're making, the how and the why. Now it's some kids that are maybe late teenagers. You don't need to get into the gory details, but certainly big decisions, big forks in the road that you are facing. It's important to talk about those with grown kids for sure, especially if you want those kids to inherit an asset, whether it's a business or just financial asset. But it's also important to have those communications going on, because if they haven't been talking about it and it comes up one day, 5 years hence, they're not going to have any context or any understanding of the vocabulary and the details around the question. And that's why the traditions of communication become so important. Even though they may not be so meaningful and big for the 50-year future, they need the context to make the big decisions, or to be engaged in, or be aware of and understand and remember 25 years in the future why that decision was made. And that's, again, when the beginnings of value and character begin to be communicated too, because you can now remember why granddad made that decision and the factors he or she was facing at the time. So I like that. That I think is what G1s and G2s and all Gs need to be doing, is establishing traditions of safe, open, and regular communications within the family.
And if I could pick up on something that Pierre was talking about. So I think it's really, as he said, I think it's important that you include not just the good, but the bad. So I think it's very easy for a successful family business for the story to be told about all the great things that happened, right? So-and-so accomplished this, did this, there's the growth line of the company, et cetera. But it is really important that, each generation is going to have their challenges. They're going to make mistakes. And if subsequent generations think that they only did the right thing every time, they made the right decision and never made a mistake, that's a heavy burden. That's when legacy gets to be a negative. And so, I'm fortunate in that, my dad has shared with me times where things didn't go as he anticipated. Maybe he could have done something differently. I won't share what that is. That's sort of, I think, to what Pierre was talking about, this trusted environment. You want it where it's, it's information for our family. It's not necessarily for public consumption, but so my dad can be open about these things, but it really means a lot to me and to other family members that to not see it as he was walking on water and that everything went well, because that's not the way it happened. And as we think about our contribution as the next generation, to understand that you're going to fall down, you just need to get back up.
We either win or we learn, as we hear coaches talk about, right? So yeah, there's a lot of learning stories in all of our family businesses for sure. So, as we get close to the end of our time here, we want to end on the top of the hour. So I'm going to give each of you just kind of an open essay question here. Same question. Pierre, I'll start with you, and then we'll wrap, Michael, with you, and then I'll talk a little bit about our upcoming webinar that we have next month. Fill in the blank, if you will, Pierre. My hope for the family businesses that I serve is?
My hope for the family business that I serve is that it will provide some glue and some cohesion within my distant future descendants, that they are stronger and more confident and more comfortable, self-fulfilling in their own lives.
Thank you. And Michael, my hope for the family businesses that I or we serve is
that the companies thrive, and by thriving, we benefit the communities that we serve.
Excellent. Any last thoughts? Anything that either of you, last open essay question, if you will, that you wanted to talk about, or just any parting thoughts of those were great wisdoms that you both just shared. So I appreciate that, but I want to give you an opportunity if there's any last thing you'd like to share before we wrap it up today.
Well, I hope everyone will take what they heard here and reach out to others to continue discussing these topics relative to their business, their shared family assets, their family and its culture and values and character too. Discuss it, talk about it with others that you respect and within your family.
Yeah, I think the last thing I would add just is that, we're talking about this in the context of family-owned businesses, but legacy is important to, I think, all families. So, things like 23andMe exist for a reason. People want us to have this connection to the past, to know where they came from, to be able to build on the successes and overcoming obstacles and the things that they're people that came before them, what they did. And so if you can, as a family, if it's not even a family business, but just as a family, preserve that, build on it, and maintain that connection. I think that Pierre also talked about, both from people in the past, but also, you know, cousins and other people you're connected to. I think that's really an important thing for families in general.
You know, there's many local universities wherever you're watching today, and I know here in Southern California, we have a few that have centers for oral and written history. So you might want to find a local organization near you or reach out to us, and we can point you in the right direction to get your family business legacy history written on video, as Pierre alluded to earlier. So, well, I can't thank either of you enough, Michael and Pierre, for your time today. I know you have a lot of choices and things you could be doing, and for our viewers today as well, I know it's a commitment to log in for an hour and watch and listen to these great leaders. So Michael and Pierre, thank you so much for your time today, for your wisdom on talking about legacy. I hope that all who watch today and who watch this going forward will feel a little bit more inspired on how to protect and rewrite, or better write, if you will, your family legacy. If you'd like more information about this, about First Bank or our Center for Family-Owned Businesses, you can visit us at first.bank/family business. This webinar, as well as all other webinars we've done, podcasts, research, surveys, articles, and so forth, there's quite a library available of information available for all of our family business fans and friends who want to log into the site and get more information. We invite you to join us next month, Tuesday, June 20th, from 2 to 3 p.m. Central Time. Our topic will be called Doing Good at Work. So it kind of ties into this one a little bit. B. Bocalandro, a good friend of ours, has written a book called How Simple Acts of Social Purpose Drive Success and Well-Being. So we'll be talking more about legacy through the side of social purpose and giving. With that, we thank you all for your time today, for joining us on this webinar, again, presented by the First Bank Center for Family-Owned Businesses. One last thank you to all of you who joined us, and to our esteemed guests today, Michael Dierberg of First Bank Corporation and Pierre duPont. Gentlemen, thank you so much, and thank you all, and we hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.